Kia ora and shalom. This is Josh Brown from the New Zealand Israel Innovation Hub. If you don't know about the Hub, it works to bring Israel and New Zealand closer together through trade and technology. On the 27th of October, the New Zealand Israel Innovation Hub hosted a webinar discussing financial crime and the latest AML and fraud detection technologies to face them. Panelists on the webinar included Alex Sims of Auckland University, Ron Atzmon of AU10TIX, Uddhav Kritikar of Compliance Plus, Yaron Hazan of ThetaRay, and Jeremy Levy of Agmon Law facilitated the discussion. We hosted the webinar because we wonder if New Zealand may be falling behind in its ability to challenge overseas crime networks engaging in money laundering and fraud, and in warding off attackers who are using ever more advanced tools to commit the crimes. In addition, with blockchain technology now being used to facilitate international transactions of value, beyond cybersecurity, shouldn't we be asking if corporations and individuals have the right technological processes in place to protect new forms of financial assets? Indeed, according to recent research released by the BNZ, New Zealanders are vulnerable and falling victim to more scams than ever. We believe that the answer lies in ensuring the New Zealand public is accessing and employing the most advanced AML and fraud detection tech being produced in the world today. So the objective of the webinar was to inform a New Zealand audience about the latest cybersecurity innovations that can mitigate exposure and impact cyber threats, including that of financial fraud.
Thanks, Josh. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the first meeting of the Israel-New Zealand Enterprise
Innovation Hub.
Innovation Hub, right. We go on the fly here, actually, and well, partly apologise. I'm calling from the emergency department of Royal North Shore Hospital, where I found myself with a child, so I've stepped out briefly. So I'm 90% here, but 10% not. So I'll put that, as we always say, family first, but I didn't have this commitment. So I do just want to put that as a context as to as to me, for example, not getting the name of the organization correct. But right. Anyway, this is a very important.
If you need to leave, Jeremy, I'm happy to take over.
I'm all good, Josh. I'm all good, Josh. I was just giving context to the people here. Very, very important subject that we're talking about today. We've seen, particularly in Australia, where I'm based. I'll give a bit of background. I'm a New Zealand sixth generation Kiwi, grew up in Auckland, lived in Israel for 8 years, and have been in Sydney for the last 15 years, where I'm a partner in an Israeli law firm and also very involved in cybersecurity. My partner in the law firm is one of Australia's preeminent legal experts in the area of money laundering. And so it's certainly an area which was seen as very, very important. I'm here leading the panel from our office perspective because of my Kiwi connection. In Australia, we've seen just in the last 2 or 3 weeks some very, very high-profile cases of cybersecurity breaches of large organizations. I'm talking specifically Optus and Medibank. And in both instances, there were critical data issues which arose from that. And that's just really added a lot of fuel to the fire, which is happening in Australia, in New Zealand, and in particular, but also worldwide, around risk of cybersecurity risks of cyber fraud, of criminal activity from hackers, which goes hand in hand with money laundering and everything else that we're seeing at the moment. The move to online in the last couple of years that's really been brought forward a lot more by COVID has, on the one hand, changed the way that a lot of us work. On the other hand, has provided new opportunities for cyber criminals, rich pickings, as people are working more online, and people are also more in different environments outside of the office where they have sometimes different focus points and more open to being taken advantage of in a cyber criminal type situation. So with this background, what we have seen is that the regulators are putting a lot more onus on organizations, whether they be financial institutions, all organizations that have large customer bases, both critical infrastructure and service, to take a lot more steps to know their customer. A lot more onus. We've seen with the Australian banks some massive fines for money laundering relating activities. So the regulators in Australia and in New Zealand are increasing the fines for both protection of customer data and for money laundering. So a lot more steps required for all organizations, but particularly in financial sector, but equally, for instance, in the service sector. As a law firm, we have a large onus to know our customer as well and identify customers. Same with accounting firms and most financial services. So know your customers. Anti-money laundering is becoming an increasing cost of business and a very important part of business, because getting it wrong and getting cybersecurity wrong has a major impact, reputational, loss of customers, ability to operate from a regulator and licensing perspective. And so that's what today is really all about. I'd like to, before we do turn over to the first of our speakers, firstly thank Josh for putting this panel together. I'd also like to thank the Trans-Tasman Business Circle, who are our sponsors, and move over to introduce Uddhav, who's the first of our speakers from Compliance Plus. Uddhav, I think you're on mute. If you're able to unmute yourself. So the format for today, actually, we've put aside an hour and a half of your time. I'm not sure where people are from in terms of where it's late in New Zealand, still afternoon in Australia, and obviously morning in Israel. But we're probably expecting this to carry on for roughly an hour, and there'll be some structured speaking from each of the panelists, and then we've allowed plenty of time for Q&A as well. If you do have questions throughout, if you can raise your chat, I'll try and keep an eye on that, and if need be, if it's relevant, I will interrupt the panelists. Otherwise, we may leave them to the end as well. But I think we can try and keep this relatively flexible from a structural perspective. So, Uddhav, over to you, please, to introduce yourself and Compliance Plus, and to kick off the panel.
Yeah, so Uddhav Kritikar. So I'm run Compliance Plus. It's a specialist anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism compliance consultancy. We're based in Wellington. So we sort of help New Zealand reporting entities meet their AML obligations in a cost-effective way, without overcooking compliance. So my background in AML CFT is I was with New Zealand Financial Markets Authority. So I helped set up the AML regime in New Zealand. And before that, I was in policy, and my sort of core background is law enforcement. I was a police officer in India, and worked with the New Zealand Commerce Commission. That's like your ACCC in Australia, an investigator. So yeah, but I'm just interested in how this cybersecurity affects our reporting entities. Along with Compliance Plus, we run another company that assists financial advice providers meet their obligations under the Financial Markets Conduct Act. And one of the core requirements for licensing is they have to have a cybersecurity policy. So you see the cybersecurity is in everyone's face now. It's quite necessary. In terms of the Anti-Money Laundering Act, reporting entities are collecting a lot of identity documents. They're collecting biometric information and they're storing it on their computers. They're responsible for the data that they collect. So, they have to understand how to protect the data as well, I suppose. Some of them collect bank card details. We do a lot of audits where we see that none of this information is kept securely. So, people have to be aware that if they're holding consumer data, customer data, they have to keep it secure and protect themselves from cyber attacks. I suppose their responsibility in the end.
Uddhav, what do you see as being the critical challenges that an organization needs to address from an enforcement perspective to both to meet the regulatory requirements, but also just practical on the ground stuff?
Yeah, see, as far as for the AML CFT obligation, anti-money laundering obligations, the New Zealand compliance obligations are really quite light as far as what you actually need to verify for what documents you need to keep. The supervisors here have got a code of practice that have put in a lot more obligation than there in legislation. So if they're keeping in biometric information, credit card information, they really require to understand how they can be compromised. So we've seen clients get compromised through their customers, and the customers get hacked. A customer gets an email with compromising their computer, and they then try to get into the customer's account with our clients and then siphon off data. We've had a client who uses one of New Zealand's internal affairs ID verification platform, RealMe. They got hacked as well, lost about $18,000. So it is, it's no fault of theirs. There was nothing much that they could do, but they were still compromised, because their customers got compromised, and that they can't. A business cannot control their customers, and that's how they get vulnerable. The customer gets compromised, and then they get compromised. Sometimes we've seen staff, error of judgment, just lapse of concentration, lapse of understanding. A big fund manager here got compromised through a staff member who got a phishing email, clicked the wrong button, just wasn't thinking, boom.
So Uddhav, sorry to interrupt. I think it seems you're more talking around from the cybersecurity angle.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm always amazed at I think the New Zealand official statistic is $33 million lost in cybercrime in the last year. And I'm amazed at that being so low. It should be, in Australia, we're talking literally in the billions. But then if you talk about customers being hacked and having to pay $18,000 and things like that, that's such small money compared to what's happening here. Maybe that is a less round. But let's pivot from cybersecurity, if that's okay, and really try and focus on an AML perspective. So from an AML perspective, do you see resistance from companies to incorporate the AML regulatory requirements?
See,
so in Australia, they have no choice. So I'm interested in the New Zealand perspective.
No, they don't have any choice here either. They have to, they have to comply with the legislation and regulatory requirements here. See, under our act, under our AML Act, all that they have to really get is a document, data, or information that is issued by a reliable or independent source that can help them verify the person's full name and date of birth. That is the core requirement in the New Zealand legislation. We don't require biometrics or anything like that at present. It's not required. So there is a code of practice. I think in Australia, they call it safe harbor in the Australian regulated environment. So the safe harbor, what they call a safe harbor code in New Zealand, requires them to have photographic ID documents one of the combination is you have an ID document, a driver license, then they ask you to get a bank card on along with it to support it. So of course, these are not required under legislation, but it's a code of practice. So people are following it. They've taken the option of following the more complicated code of practice rather than opting out. That's what we see here. We've not seen many businesses opt out of the code of practice. Of course, our legislation is currently being reviewed. There's a statutory review was conducted by the Ministry of Justice. So our act is going to get overhauled, in the next year or so. But by the time it comes into force, it'll be another 3 or 4 years. But we'll have a new next year.
And who is responsible for enforcement in New Zealand? Which regulatory organization?
So at present, we've got three government departments. We've got internal affairs that looks after most of the sector. They look after the real estate agents, lawyers, accountants, small loan companies, money remittance companies. Then we have the Reserve Bank that looks after the insurers, the non-bank deposit takers, the licensed non-bank deposit takers, and the banks. Then we have the Financial Markets Authority, where I was, that looks after the capital markets, basically, or the trustee companies.
And so the Financial Markets Authority would be the equivalent to what we have here with APRA in Australia, which literally in Australia, there have been fines of hundreds of millions of dollars levied, which is a good way to get a bank's attention or anyone else's attention. What are the levels of fines that can be levied in New Zealand by the financial market regulator?
The largest fine I've come across is $4 million.
Okay, so it's missing some zeros.
There's a cap on our
to really get people's attention.
Yeah, it's $5 million for a body corporate. So these guys got 4, but these guys were they had sort of allowed Canadian-based person to the Chinese origin to move money through New Zealand to China, and the Chinese government would hot on them.
And why wouldn't you if you've got a risk of a $5 million fine? That's just the cost of doing business. Anyway, thank you. I'm saying it if the fine is that low, a large organization will view it as a cost of doing business rather than as an actual incentive to not relative to fines in other jurisdictions.
Look, is that sorry to jump in here, but is that fine $5 million per breach or just overall fine for an entity?
Overall.
I would have assumed that it would be for per breach, I think.
No, it's capped at 5 million.
It may not be the limit, it's what's been applied. Look, thank you, Uddhav. I'd like to actually, just to keep things moving, if you have a final statement before we hand over to Alex, that would be, if you do have anything you'd like to sum up.
No, that's it. I mean, like, it's an interesting mix of cybersecurity and AML, no? Sort of an interesting mix.
Great. So, very excited to introduce Alex Sims from the University of Auckland for a number of reasons. Partly because I'm an alumni of Auckland University, but also I think in an area where such as money laundering, where it really is still a developing discipline, very important input from the universities, both from a technology perspective, but also from a regulatory legal framework and approaches as to how to deal with and how best, from a best practice perspective, they can help corporations manage this. So I know that in Australia, the universities are really at the forefront, and I'm sure, Alex, you'll be demonstrating the same for us in New Zealand. So over to you, Alex, if you can unmute, please.
Yeah, hi, Jeremy. Thank you. I do stuff around AML, CFT, KYC, sort of tangentially. It's not my main area, but I have been, for example. So I'm at the University of Auckland in the business school in commercial law, and I've been, for example, still am on the industry advisory group for the AML CFT legislation because our Ministry of Justice, which is in charge of it, has had a recent review. And actually, that, just from a legal point of view, it's problematic because the Ministry of Justice writes the legislation, but it doesn't enforce it. It's up to different supervisors, and they have different interpretations of it. But that point about the low level of fines, I put in the chat. In New Zealand, we have very low level of fines, just full stop. So yeah, people do treat it as a cost of doing business. I mean, it's they think it's high, but it's not. I've sort of got almost the opposite view of probably most people here, and because we're talking about on one hand AML, CFT, KYC, okay, and then you've got your cybersecurity. The requirements of know your customer and things and keeping this information is actually leading to worse outcomes because they've got this honeypot of information. So, you know, you're going to come in and, you know, and take it, which we've seen happen a lot. And most of my work is actually more in the blockchain area. And one of the things that a lot of people are working on is decentralized identity. So you've got verifiers who will actually verify information and then give verified credentials to other people so that so for example, instead of me having to sort of ascertain that you live in New Zealand and you're a certain age or what your age is, I can just say, are you a New Zealander? Are you over a certain age? And I can be assured that you are. I don't need to know a lot of this information, so I'm not holding that information. So it actually makes it a lot safer for all concerned. And in fact, because I'm teaching on this point at the moment, and I looked a couple of days ago, there's probably about 100 people in the world just working on digital identity for these types of things. So, but it's really, really difficult though with all of these things because there's so many different providers and businesses won't use them unless customers are using them, and customers won't use them unless people are using them. And even I think RealMe was mentioned before. And that has had a very low uptake. That's taken a lot of years. And that's also slightly dangerous because of, what is it dangerous? Yeah, it's not particularly great. So, yeah, that's sort of...
Sorry, Alex, why do you say that about RealMe? Because it's important because governments are moving towards documentation or digital records more so. So RealMe is certainly consistent with what other governments are doing. Why do you see the New Zealand experience being different?
Well, it is, but you don't necessarily want the government or any one entity to have that much information about people, really. Whether it's not just necessarily government, because the same thing happening with Google and Facebook when you use federated identity. Don't know if everyone, you've seen it before, is when you go to sign into something, it can give you the option creating an account through Google or Facebook. That's an example of federated identity as well. So I think it's, to have concentrations of power in any one is quite worrying. Which I'm presuming you'd recommend that people don't do. I'd recommend that people do not do that. I mean, just for, but then it's easy, isn't it? Because you don't have to worry about remembering all these things. But what's really interesting, one thing I can say on the ground is that at the university, we set up a cybersecurity foundry a number of years ago, and the level of interest amongst businesses of cybersecurity, especially at board level, so C-suite, was very, very low. No one wanted to know about it. And it's really changed over the past year or so, which is good because it suddenly realized that this is a major problem. And in fact, New Zealand is one of the worst places in the world, as in the most attractive places to be targeted by cyber criminals, because we're too trusting. And that figure that you said about 33 million is no way, it's much, much higher than that, but people just aren't disclosing it. But another
sorry, can we step back to that for something that's not disclosing that, it's also connected to AML and other things as well. Is there a legal obligation to disclose?
There is now with privacy breaches. and there didn't used to be. So if you've got a privacy breach, but a lot of this isn't necessarily a privacy breach. So if you've got in and you've got details of, personal information, but if it's a straight in hack to get money or documents or something like that, which aren't personal information, then I don't think there is a requirement to notify anybody of that. So it really does depend on what it is. But also, it's just poor design as well. So, for example, people, the former speaker, Uddhav, was saying that, well, if people click on the wrong thing, compromise their computers, their access. But there's good ways of setting that up. For example, to stop passwords being hacked. And again, another thing on the ground is when at my University of Auckland, put in two-factor authentication for passwords, that just the number of people getting into the system, of hacking the system, almost fell to zero. Because prior to that, there were lots of compromised people getting in through, people using old passwords and things like that. So it does have a real effect. So I think that's sort of me for me. Oh, just one other quick thing is that one of the issues of, and you're saying before, Jim, in your opening, was about the compliance costs. It's killing businesses in New Zealand. And also a lot of them have to do enhanced due diligence as well, which requires a lot more information being taken. And there's a lot of pushback. And the worry that we see, especially with blockchain and the crypto space, is that a lot of people in New Zealand, we're now borderless, okay? If there's too many requirements for a local provider, people just go offshore, get an account with someone else, use a VPN, where they end up having a lot less protection. And so, I mean, I'm working on various projects around this issue, and it's to get through to the government and legislators that you need to be careful with this. In New Zealand, there seems to be a thing that we are going to have the most rigorous AML, in the world type of thing. But why? If we're actually doing more harm than good.
That's a very interesting concept, because it can put the cart before the horse. If the AML requirements, if the regulatory obligations are so rigorous that the cost of implementing them becomes inefficient and uneconomical for an organization, it means they find it very hard to do business in New Zealand. So how do you see that changing, Alex, before you do move on? Because I think it's a pretty important, a regulatory obligation needs to have the end goal in mind, which is obviously to provide the right level of protection, but it also needs to be balanced enough to be able to work. So how can that happen?
Well, there's still ongoing discussions about this. So, I mean, I was actually on a panel last week about this, and just talking with people, before and after, there is so much anger amongst legitimate businesses who are trying to navigate this. I mean, it's great if you've got a consultancy that you are doing AML services, you're making a lot of money, but it's not good. And also what happens is that the larger entities, they don't mind it. They can absorb it. It's the small startups and things like that. They're the ones that just get squeezed out. So it's not particularly healthy.
Can I say something here?
Sure.
In our legislation, actually, where Cabinet put the AML Act through, they discuss a lot about cost to business on it, right? So the core legislation in New Zealand, the cost is just no cost. You just have to get somebody's full name, date of birth, and address. You can use a school letter. You can use a doctor's certificate. And I've challenged it. I've challenged DIA, I've challenged FMA, I've challenged RBNZ on that. You don't even require to go to any identity service provider in New Zealand to verify that document. We have an act called the Contract and Commercial Law Act. Section 211 of our Contract and Commercial Law Act allows our business to accept a document sent to them electronically as an ID document. We've challenged it. The trouble in New Zealand is our market does not know. The supervisors themselves do not know that it is so easy to comply. enhanced CDD. The enhanced CDD requirement you speak about, Alex, the enhanced CDD requirement is only if the person is, the customer is a trust. That is when you have to do enhanced CDD. And the source of funds requirement here is you have to get the source of funds. Where are they getting their money from? A letter from their accountants, or a last tax certificate. That in the New Zealand legislation is enough to get them to comply. So the cost of compliance in New Zealand is because they don't understand the legislation. So what we did was we contacted and most of our compliance people, they do the ACAMS courses, right? The ACAMS courses, all Banking Secrecy Act and Patriot Act and all this sort of stuff. So we partnered with Massey. We didn't go to Auckland. We partnered with Massey University, and we sort of launched an AML compliance officers course here for the New Zealand market. That looks only at the New Zealand legislation, because we found that they just don't understand. The supervisors don't understand. Our market doesn't understand. Actually, the government had put in a lot of effort to try to cut out costs. Even our audit requirements here are really low. The person does not have to be, qualified to do a financial audit. I wrote the audit guideline for New Zealand. It is just really low. I wrote most of the guidelines for New Zealand, actually, for AML.
So it sounds like, Uddhav, you're taking responsibility for some of the things that Alex is complaining about.
But the original guidelines, they were really simple. We simplified it right in the beginning. Then I left FMA, set up my consultancy, and then DIA got all these ex-cops in there who cooked things up, and they were looking at these compliance documents that were just supposed to be guides, as if they were marking a university assignment. And then people said, what the hell is going on? And they were just, non-compliant. But it was just not there in the legislation. So if you challenge them, a number of times we've challenged them. We've got a case going on in the Court of Appeal now against the Reserve Bank on these things, But the thing is, we found that they don't understand. Ministry of Justice, they hate me, Alex. Take my name there, they will not go in the room if I'm there. So, but that is because we think that they have just cooked it up. Compliance was not supposed to be expensive. The government wanted the willing compliance. We wanted willing compliance because if you hit somebody on the head with a phone book, they're not going to really comply. It's just going to be, it's just going to be like ticking the box type of stuff, where the government actually wanted them to give sort of actionable intelligence. That was the initial, that's the flag we flew when we used to go out. You have to know your customer, know how much money they've got, what are they going to do with you. If it is not right, tell the police. That was it. And that is what it changed. It's changed. It just completely changed in New Zealand. And that is why the cost of business is escalating.
At this point in the webinar, Jeremy's internet connection dropped and the sound quality became distorted. Here, Jeremy introduces the next speaker, Ron Atzmon of AU10TIX.
Okay, so first of all, good afternoon, midday, wherever you are over the globe. I just came back last night from Money 2020 in Vegas. So I'm Ron. I'm the founder of AU10TIX and chairman. First of all, I'll give in a second. I couldn't more share the same feelings of my other two respected panelists here that be talking about compliance and regulation and these issues. So we are an identity verification and management company, and actually you talked about lots of touch points that we deal on a day-to-day basis. So just give you a bit of a background about AU10TIX. So kind of an interesting company. So we started, give you like a 2-minute overview of the company. We started, we're a spin-off of a bigger company called ICTS, which is a big airport security company. So when you land in Israel and they scan your passport authentication, that's our core tech. That's where we started more than 20 years ago. We pivoted in the mid-2000 to financial service because we understood that the requirements for ID verification and identity management is quite big. We started with a few banks in Israel and in Europe, but I think the uptick that happened in the last, I'll say 14, 15 years that I've been in since I've joined the company is the whole issue, not just on the on-prem side of it, but also in the online space. So we are now We provide a full identity suite. It comes from documentation, biometrics, data. As Alex said, we are now also into the verifiable credential sector. We have a big partnership with Microsoft on the AML platform, and I couldn't agree more. I'll address a few touch points that have been discussed because it's super interesting, and there's a bit of a conflict. I mean, like, I've seen the industry evolve in the last 15 years, and it's quite interesting. And it's not just a technology part, it is a psychological shift as well. So much more, we are, at the end of the day, we're human beings, and that's what drives us. So just give you perspective, so a bit over the stuff. So as I said, we do documentation, we do biometrics, we do syntactic fraud. We have a big consortium with our customers. I think you probably have touched, you are not aware, but you have been verified and onboarded and re-verified by us because we work with, I'll give you a sector, Google and PayPal and Airbnb and Coinbase, and you get alcohol delivery from and if you get a scooter with Bird, or if you're a celebrity on Twitter, so we do the blue check mark, then LinkedIn. So we do payments and gaming and crypto and banking. We are actually active in Australia and New Zealand, not as much as I wanted. We have a small mortgage lender in New Zealand who works with us for the last 7 years called Skrirail. I don't know if you know them. We work with Pepperstone. We work with a few SMB lenders in Australia. I haven't been down under. I'm dying to go there. I was supposed to go there just before COVID, but I'm definitely planning to come to Australia and New Zealand in 2023. So I'll go to the end where Alex discussed about the issue of federated identity and decentralized identity. It's a very, very, very nice concept. I'll say this. Because yes, federated, decentralized, whatever you're gonna call it, there are a few names to it. That is the utopia that people will control their own identity. There's a big conflict, the government. Because what is a government? What is a country? A country based on 3 pillars: land, currency, identity. I've yet to see any government giving away the identity. It's their currency. That's what makes us a country. And I think, and when you saw Facebook try to create its own currency, it got hammered. And I don't see, and you're talking about the login, Facebook login, Google login. There are other players that wants to play within this space. I don't see that happening. On the other side, we work on the verifiable credential with Microsoft, their own platform, and we already have a working platform in that respect with Microsoft. Actually, we are the verifier, and we are also the enabler, and we resold the product inside Microsoft. I have a problem. Well, it's a challenge. We're all talking to all of our customers if it's the crypto exchanges or PayPal or Google or everybody else. Even the blockchain is not that safe. And I think one of our customers that is deep into blockchain, listen, they haven't really figured out, okay, he said, we don't even know what kind of a chain we should use, because even it's a bit of, I'll say this, it's not that secure, then it's semi-baked. So definitely the world wants to go to decentralized identity. The question is how you standardize it. You see, there was an interesting article by the TSA about mobile driving license security. I'll ask Jacob maybe to share it on. The problem is that there is no standards. Each state is doing, what we're seeing is each state is doing its own. Some of them are using Thales, some of them are using IDEMIA, some of them are using these small development houses. So it's a very big problem plugging in all these standards, and there is no real standard in this. So that's the number one. And also, don't forget, from a consumer point of view, us as consumers, our identity is a currency. So there needs to be a trigger for us to give. So let's say you build your identity wallet, and you say to a customer, okay, give me your identity. The guy said, the person say, why? why should I give you my currency? I mean, I won't give you, I'll give you in return to something. I'll give you in return for logging into Airbnb. I'll give you in return to exchanging a crypto on Coinbase. I'll give you in exchange to, I don't know, doing alcohol delivery with Uber Eats or with DoorDash, but that's it. So it's a bit of a chicken and the egg. So, and also what you see, it's another point I want to bring, the whole issue of open banking inside the UK. You know that there about 10 years ago, the whole issue that, you know, the bank should share data between themselves in order to, the Bank of England wanted, so, you know, it would be easy to move banks, but that's not really happening. I don't see Airbnb playing ball with Booking.com or with Expedia in order to make their customer life easier so they can book, you know, multiple platforms with one user. We work with both of them, and I don't see that happening anytime soon.
How are you using technology to assist with identity management, and how can organizations become more efficient to make this task more economical or more automated, using your technology or technology of other companies?
So listen, of course they should use us, because I mean, listen, we've been in this space for, I would say, in the digital world for the last 15 years, and because of our globality and are able to support our customers on a global level, if it's New Zealand, Auckland, New Zealand or Auckland, New Zealand, Australia, or any other place in down under over there in some other places. So we definitely enable them to do it very seamlessly. And also what we give them, I think one of the big issues that we saw with Optus and with some other players, what we allow them is to, one, not to store data. So we purge the data almost instantly after we verified. And the other thing is, well, one of our core techs is also we vectorize all what we have done in the past, and we hash it, and which is unreversible. So also we allow them to protect the data. So the issue that we're going to be breached is, well, nothing is foolproof, okay, but we really limit their data exposure either on our platform or when we send back the data to them in a very secured way. So that's based, and we allow them, and we saw also again uptake of this during COVID, when there are one of the big issues in this industry is that it is very manual, and it's done by a lot of people in the back end, and the fact that we are our company, we're about 220. Most of us are based in Israel, but we support global businesses, and you understand. I mean, in this example, some of our customers, they're down under, and we, I'll say this, we haven't even been there, although we've been working in the origin for many years. So we give that capability in that respect. So I would say when you're looking at that space, that's one of the key factors. Okay, how do you support COVID, no COVID, crises, no crises, war, no war? And that's a very big thing, and I think one of our key strengths. And from a scalability, and also the ability to get as much rich data points from your vendor in that respect to give up the highest confidence. But as my respected colleague said it before, in New Zealand, the limitations are very, or not the limitations, the requirements are relatively low and should definitely be uplifted. We have a few customers that are being forward thinking or forward going, whatever you're going to think. They're overprotective, which is very good, but definitely it's interesting. There was also this issue that we saw. Australia is definitely pushing into it. They had a few initiatives on the digital identity, but again, the problem is that lack of standardization requires you to go to capabilities that exist, and in order to give high velocity answers, and with as much touch point in that respect, that's where very helpful. So I think in the foreseeable future, I see the sets that we are providing to our customers in your region. I would say the best option at the moment until we also, as a part of the new leaders in the issue of verifiable credential, will help create a standard. And again, I've been very long. I've seen a few pivots. I haven't seen. I'll say this: I wish I had a crystal ball to see where this industry is going, but I don't. And we're trying to. As you say, we're trying to have our fingers in all over the pies, in all these different stands, in order to see what will eventually pick up. So that's our position in that respect.
So Ron, how does customer verification data required from an AML perspective connect with business customer data, or that stuff that would typically be stored on a CRM solution? So I mean, you're at the front end, obviously, when somebody is coming in to become a customer for the organization. But you say you purge the data. How does that then marry to the CRM? Or in other words, are you treating the customer data for the AML perspective or KYC perspective just as a silo, for want of a better word, which goes through, ticks that box, and then the core customer data is still stored with all its risks that Alex was talking about before, from a doing business with that customer perspective?
Okay, so you asked me
perspective.
No. So it's a very good question, and on our point of view, everything it's purged and well, that's a question. Here's the thing. So we give a very, very wide option to our customers how they want this to be done. By default, raw data for us is a hot potato, so we try to stay away from it. Okay. But if they want us to keep that data, we do it only in order for protection, for their protection, in order for them to be able to then. So what we have. I'll take it to the next level. I'll address this point. We have a platform we call Instinct, and Instinct is our identity fraud engine. And what Instinct does is that it's a master decentralized platform that we have 5 global production environments around the world, in Asia, Europe, and the Americas. And what happened is that we look for anomalies on the data that we've seen in the past. So they have they either don't need to. One option is just to cover their eyes, says like, I don't want to know anything, and just delete it, and they'll delete it on their own. The second option we give them is to look into repetitions into their own data. So for example, if you've seen Jeremy's, your PII with Josh names and with Alex face, all of them are legitimate, valid data points. But what they're trying to build is to build different identities. And actually, what we start to see at the moment is since we saw all over the place of the Optus breach, okay, is that these data will start to appear in different places around the world. And because the Australian market is a very cocooned market, but what they don't understand is that once it's out, it can appear in it's out, and then people start playing with you in Brazil, which is a high risk environment, or even in the US or in the UK. There are a lot of expats traveling. There's a very big Aussie community in the UK, and why shouldn't it be? You'll appear in New York. It's you travel. So the second layer is for them just so we purge it, but we do have these signals, and the question is, what do they do on their side? I don't know. I think that what we're giving them. So this purge it, they have these vectors, and they hit these vectors, and it's okay. I've seen Jeremy in my ecosystem, and he was used for, I don't know, maybe one time opening a bank account, and the second time was for getting alcohol delivery, and the morning after is to rent a house with Airbnb, or to make a booking with Booking.com in that respect. And the third option we allow them is not just to look at these vectors in their own business. Sorry, well, they can start if they wish to, but then they can opt into the consortium and then say, listen, I'm now, let's say if it's Optus, okay, so Optus will basically opt in to start playing with other players. Could be Australian, it might be Australian customer, or it could be a global customer, like let's say, like we work, for example, with Grab in Asia, or I don't know, with the other players, or they do like they buy with Shopback in Thailand, exactly, which is a very big BNPL. So the question is, so we give them these three options, and they decide, and we protect the data. It's a very secured way in our stuff. They are starting to ask us how they can protect their data on their side, and we start offering them different methods. But you know, these huge the older generation, the ones that come with heritage, technological heritage, they have a bit more. They're a bit not slower, but it will take them time to get there. The more newly formed companies who are more tech savvy, they already started. Okay, how do we protect our data and how we purge it and have the minimal stuff in that respect, so breaches will not happen. But it's I'll say this. Also, this hashing and protecting data, this is something that's only been fashionable in the last couple of years. I think, again, because we're in the front of technology, we are really taking initiative. And from my point of view, data is PI is one of the most scary. I won't say scaring, okay, but if you understand what you're dealing with, you'll try to stay away from it as much as you can, you know, and because as you saw, I mean, you saw the fines and the complicated issues. It can take company down. So you're trying to stay away in that respect. So as Alex said, it is the big challenge. Okay, you need it, but you don't really want to have it. So, and how do you balance these facts? So it's a bit of a love and hate game.
So thanks, Ron. I think I'd like to now hand over to Yaron. Yaron, Hazan, hopefully we'll be able to bring this all together, because on the one hand, Yaron, you're dealing with regulators who are a very, very key part of this equation, but also your company ThetaRay has an AI approach, which is really important, I think, and can deal with even Ron. I was surprised at how manual some of the things you're describing. Let's move across to the less manual, to the AI, and hear Yaron's input. Both would be very helpful to hear about what the company does, and then specifically your experiences with the regulators around the world.
Thank you very much. It was fascinating to hear the previous speakers. I will start by introducing myself. My name is Yaron Hazan. I'm Vice President for Regulatory Affairs in ThetaRay, intuitive AI company that detects financial crime for large organizations and regulators. In my background, I started my career in the Israeli police. I was responsible for counter-terrorist funding investigations and the financial activity of international organized crime groups. Then I moved to PwC, where I was leading forensics and initiated compliance and anti-money laundering practices in Israel. I was leading it for 7 years. Then I was the head of compliance at HSBC Bank, financial crime compliance and regulatory compliance. And finally, in the last almost 6 years with ThetaRay, I find myself one step ahead of the bad guys. I always used to chase the trails that they leave behind, and now I can find them in spots that they would never imagine. Into our topic, our discussion and what ThetaRay does to enable financial institutions, small and big, face those challenges in an effective manner. We heard in this forum of people who want to do the right thing and want to help financial institutions do the right things, many different opinions about data collection, data maintenance, and the use of data. The beauty of ThetaRay is that by very sophisticated algorithms that work, if you know the term, by unsupervised machine learning approach, meaning that you don't have to know a lot of the data before you start detecting the suspicious events. ThetaRay learns behavior in the data on many parameters at the same time and highlights the suspicious event by many risk indicators. So for example, if I used to do certain amount of activity usually, and now I'm dealing with more people as counterparties, I'm receiving funds from 3 sources rather than 1. I'm interacting with New Zealand when in the past I was only interacting with Bahrain and Singapore. And the volume of the money coming in suddenly equals to the volume of the money coming out. All these are measured at the same time. And these are only few small, simple parameters that I just mentioned. And boom, you have a case that any investigator, when he looks at it, immediately identifies the facts of what was wrong, what are the reasons that this thing is wrong, who was involved, where the money came to, where the money came from, and all the participants and the potential facts. Add to that, we can also identify specific indicators for terrorist funding, specific indicators for human trafficking, specific indicators for drug trafficking, and suddenly the banks that use us, the Santander, Credit Agricole, BNP Paribas, the large banking groups in the world, or the fintechs that use us, whether it be Nuvei, Pioneer, Travelex, or whoever, suddenly they have a shield, a defense mechanism that will enable them detect not only, forgive me for the word, the stupid indicators of specific things that everybody used to look for 20 years, but suddenly to see a real picture of reality and understand that they can actually stop and prevent crimes on a timely manner. Now, with all the respect, and there is a lot to the progress we have done in the KYC mechanisms, in the authentication mechanisms, criminals are smarter, and criminals usually found the ways to break in. And ThetaRay enables and allows banks like Santander move from de-risking activity, slowing down cross-border payments, and taking ridiculous prices for any transaction that you want to do. And I'm talking also from personal experience. I just moved to Dubai from Israel, and I had to move a certain amount for advance payment for rent, and I paid $1,000 in total for costs, exchange rates, etc. It's ridiculous. But ThetaRay enables banks like Santander to do it smoother, to identify things on a timely manner, and therefore to open the door. And if everybody talks in the world on financial inclusion, they are doing financial inclusion because they can trust their controls. Now, on the other hand, if you look at places like Estonia, Sweden, and New Zealand, what are the common characteristics for those 3 types of countries? Advanced people, advanced economies. In many cases, they already are advanced from technology perspective, but forgive me for the word, naive. And you combine those 2, and you have the great place for bad guys to start operating from. And Estonia got it really bad. And I know a lot of people in Estonia, both on the supervisory aspect of banks, but also in the financial intelligence unit. And they now say, oh my God, we were so naive. We trusted everybody. We opened the door to everybody. Now they're being a bit maybe over defensive, but it's very, very usual. When I worked at HSBC, we became crazy. We closed accounts and exit customers almost for no reason, just because what we have experienced in the past. So economies that are naturally based on trust, on good people and advanced economies run fast. So we run fast to blockchain, we run fast to crypto, we run fast to fintech. We believe that we can advance in our economy solutions, but we forget that at the same time, we get more vulnerabilities for ID thefts, for breaching and cyber attacks, and definitely for becoming the weakest link in the chain for the money laundering and terrorist funding purposes. So if I'm a bad guy, and this is why I always laugh when I see where our customers ask us to use the high-risk countries list, I always laugh and say, you define high-risk countries as places that you know in the past what happened. If I'm a bad guy, I wouldn't go to these countries because I would be immediately flagged. And all the authentication and all the monitoring solutions that learned from the past will immediately identify me. So I would go to New Zealand. I would go to Norway. I would go to places that people perceive them as legitimate, trustworthy, but the regime and the practices in these places are still a bit naive because they have not yet experienced severe attacks or severe large criminal schemes. If you think about Australia, what happened with Jetpack and the child trafficking or human trafficking scheme that was published a few years back, this caused a dramatic change because in Australia, for example, the anti-money laundering law was relatively legislated very late after many other countries. It's not that in Australia there were no laws or restrictions or controls in place to stop criminal activity from easily coming into the financial system, but the philosophy, mentality, and culture in many cases influence us to act too late, only after we were hit. So I will pause here for questions because, as you can see, I have so much to say about it, but maybe you want me to take it to specific directions.
Very interested in what you're talking about, account monitoring and being able to identify, anomalies in customer behavior. So what we find with reporting entities who use automated software for this is that they get actually inundated with false positives, right? Because the account monitoring software works across all customers in the business, and then they have to employ someone just to look at cases that are actually what the term that they use is false positive, right? A bank in New Zealand got into serious trouble with their regulator for not being able to do enough investigations on all the false positives that were being thrown out by the software. So we've got a few automatic software outfits that I've sort of come across in my audits. Is a company called Jade, other one Thomson Reuters does something called TransWatch. We've looked at them. So how does your software sort of differ, and how will it prevent false positives, a business getting false positives?
ThetaRay produces less than 20% false positives. If you've been in the industry for enough time, it's crazy. I was head of compliance at HSBC. I had 100% false positives for 3 years. We flipped the coin. Our detection ratio is positive, and not only positive, the amount or the portion of alerts that we produce that is important, significant, and investigation worthy is almost each and every alert that the system produces. Now, on the other hand, as we all know, especially for small organizations, but also for the large ones, the other side of the problem is efficiency, not only effectiveness, and you don't want to deal with thousands of alerts. We don't do it by increasing the number of alerts. The banks that selected us 3-4 years back to be the leading transaction monitoring system, you can imagine that they have done that only after they've tested us for a year, compared to other solutions, and testing KPIs both on effectiveness, meaning that we can find those unknown unknowns, unique patterns, complex patterns, and new modus operandis of criminal activity, but they also wanted to see that they will not have to deal with too many alerts on the other hand.
Yeah.
And we have achieved that. We have in average produced 40% less than any other rule-based transaction monitoring solution, because we are not rule-based, because the system is smart and not non-smart, as I said earlier, like the usual common systems for transaction monitoring. And the fact that the approach is a multi-dimensional approach, and when you identify a case that is suspicious, why do we call it intuitive AI? It's like our brain. When you see something, when you're driving and you see something bad that is coming, your brain actually connects several dots at the same time. You identify a kid, that you identify a ball, you identify that he's running in a certain speed, and you can anticipate that he will come, and if you will not slow down, you may crash. The same goes with ThetaRay. You identify several parameters at the same time. You don't look transaction by transaction. It's meaningless. So you take aggregated activity and accumulated activity. And this alone, by the way, helps us to be much more efficient. If me, Yaron Hazan, opened my bank account at a bank in Dubai, and I've done, let's say, in my account were like 500 transactions on a month, maybe if I would have looked at it at rule-based approach, I could have triggered 7 different alerts for the same behavior, because one transaction breached a certain threshold of a certain scenario, and the other one breached a certain threshold of another scenario. In ThetaRay, you'll get one alert, because you see all the scenarios or all the risk indicators, which ones were breached by how much, how different I am from the population, how different I am from my history on each and every one. And the beautiful thing, that you don't find the most interesting cases in those spots where we usually used to look at. You don't find them with the high-risk customers only, you don't find them with the high-risk countries only, and you don't find them with the high-risk products only, with the cash or whatever it was. You find them with the specific changes in behavior and the specific unusual behaviors that once you see them, you say, wait a minute. Why should a customer do that from a legitimate financial perspective? Now, I would add to this question something you have not mentioned, but will also address many of the things that we talked in the beginning of the conversation. Privacy, data collection, etc. We need minimized data. When we analyze SWIFT data, in the SWIFT message alone, you have all you need to understand suspicious behavior. So if you take field 50 with beneficiary details, 50A or 50B or 50C with the beneficiary bank, originating details and originating bank details, all the way to the banks involved in between, 259 beneficiary name and address and bank. That's it. You have all you need to understand if something is wrong. Now, the beauty of it, that the system will not indicate this is suspicious because Yaron Hazan has done it, and Yaron Hazan has done things in the past. No, no, no. It will indicate the behavior. Now, we have lawyers here as well. The criminal acts start with an action, with something wrong that somebody has done. You cannot blame someone from being connected to a bad guy. You can blame someone because he did a crime. So first of all, it's the facts, the deed, the action that people has done, and we monitor the behavior. And then in criminal law, you need to prove the intention that somebody intended to commit a crime. Now, let's go back in. We talk about financial industry. We don't talk yet about law enforcement. We also support law enforcement and financial intelligence units, but leave this aside for a moment. The financial industry, their responsibility as the first line of defense for humanity is when they provide their services to be able to identify the risks and to report them. So I think that if you take this obligation to the concrete of what I am doing, and because what I'm doing, I'm exposing the financial industry and humanity to the potential criminal activity, this is where I should put the light on. And for that, you don't need all this mechanism to screen people, because we know the bad guys know their names are on the list, and we know that they know that if now there are sanctions against Russia, if they will operate from a company in Russia, it will be more difficult for them to transfer money. So they will go to New Zealand and Denmark and places that are perceived more legitimate. They will open companies very easily with names of directors that were not listed in the past and didn't have any criminal record. And then they will start moving the funds into the financial industry. This is where you want to catch them. Because then, if you have the right tools, they will not survive more than a month. And when they start operating a laundering machine, and we detected the Russian laundromat in the past, if you heard of it, and we presented it to the Bank of International Settlements, the Financial Action Task Force, FinCEN, FCA in the UK, everybody was shocked that it was actually possible to detect it. Because when you look at what these guys did, they knew exactly how the mechanisms work. They knew exactly how the transaction monitoring systems are tuned. This is why we end up as the good guys with the false positive that you mentioned, and they easily and smoothly run billions of dollars in the system without being noticed.
Thanks, Yaron. It's getting that right balance is critical as to how this will actually ultimately play out in a constructive and successful way or not. And I think the use of AI and solutions, technological solutions such as what your company is offering is of paramount importance. Do people have questions? We'd like to now invite participants, if they do want to unmute themselves and ask a question of the panel, please feel free. As an alternative, if you don't want, we're happy to also take questions and feed them through to the panelists at a later stage. But first, we'll see if someone does have questions for now.
Hi, Jeremy. Is it okay if I mention something?
Sure, Maya.
Hi, so my name's Maury. I'm from New Zealand, and I'm currently, oh, it's all good. So I'm actually currently at the FMA, at the Financial Markets Authority. So that's the regulator of capital markets in New Zealand, and one of the anti-money laundering regulators as well. So I don't actually work directly with the monitoring space. I'm in the legal team, but I just wanted to make a comment earlier about your question about like whether companies in New Zealand are kind of jumping on board with AML requirements or if they're reluctant. And I can tell you anecdotally from, from my work that what we are seeing is that companies are really, really reluctant to do anything to do with AML. They see it as time consuming, they see it as cost consuming. We've had a case where, from what my colleague told me, a director of a very large fund was Googling AML requirements while meeting with the AML. The
FMA, right.
While meeting with the FMA. And so it's for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's because of the cost, like Alex mentioned. Sometimes it's because they don't see the benefit, because they're like, oh, nothing's ever happened. Why should we bother? Sometimes it's because they don't realize there are technological options that could save them that cost and time. The FMA is kind of, to your earlier comments about, oh, why aren't there larger fines, or why is it, what's the attitude of the regulator like? The legislation's quite new in New Zealand. So like when someone mentioned earlier about how Australia adopted this sort of legislation late, we adopted even after that. So, and a couple of years ago, the FMA sort of published a note saying that we've kind of given businesses several years to adjust now. We're going to start taking a more stern view. I'm not sure if that's happening or not, at least I have no insight into that. But it is really interesting to hear kind of comments from kind of what the technological solutions are to some of these problems. Yeah, so that's just basically what I wanted to say, is that, yeah, companies in New Zealand generally tend to be reluctant, and sometimes it's a matter of them thinking they will lose their customers if they require them to provide even the basic information, the really basic information that the legislation requires them to provide.
Thanks. That's a very important insight. And even beforehand, when Ron was describing the fact that they're receiving the data overseas, the light bulb that went on in my head was straight up with privacy concerns. So you can see why both even from a privacy regulator and a customer regulator, implementing these things would be challenging in a lot of ways, but still necessary. Thanks. Does Jacob?
Yes, I'd like to make a general statement quickly and then also ask a question of Ron. For those of you who are unaware, here in Australia, we had a rather large exfiltration of data from a telecommunications company called Optus. One of the big things about that was the fact that the PII stolen was unencrypted. And also the fact that Optus had been holding on to that PII for a long, long time for no good reason by the sounds of things. Now, the big question that's going around the community here is, why wasn't that data encrypted? And I was going to ask Ron, you guys provide a rapid ID service, number one, and I want you perhaps just to speak to that and how, if that actually, when you do the rapid ID, does it hash the PII? And also, I believe you guys specialize in synthetic fraud, and I wanted you to, if you could speak to that a little bit also. So the first and the second part.
Okay, so first of all, you're right. I mean, I think I'll give you a small company joke. They call me Ron Paranoid. I'm always paranoid on PII data. So you've been too long in the industry and you've been with so many customers, and you see, we go under the hood with so many big tech players, not just tech players. I think even with Yaron, we have a few mutual customers like Santander or Saxo or Nordea or CIBC. So I mean, you see that and you're getting these shivers that you see that stuff, and it's okay. How can we not get exposed? And whoever's been long enough knows the risk and the challenges and what happens if something goes wrong. This is why 4 years ago we were already encrypting everything, okay, but I think we took it to the next level in 2019 when we started hashing everything, even what we have, and protecting a way that even us cannot rehack it, or I hope. I mean, like, you never know, but I think, and we test ourselves all the time. So this is number one in that respect, for in order to protect us and protect our customers, which is number one. And you saw, and Jeremy talked about data going all over the place. I mean, because we are a global player by definition, and we deal with data. I mean, like, with most of our customers, if you're looking, I listed a few of them. I don't want to name them again, but we deal with our customers in Indonesia and in India and in Nigeria, and because we are a single source to them, because we are the only true global player in our sector. And I don't need to tell you how complicated it is to have. It's having one vendor is good. If you need to have multiple vendors for different geolocations, it becomes even more complicated, talking about cost issues and operation issues. So this is why you also purge the data, and if what is not purged, we hash it, and we are compliant by all the regulations. If it's GDPR or CCPA, or there are new regulators coming all over the place. So even now we're getting there's certification in Australia, and we are in the process of getting certified for the Australian market, because it's such a big market for us, not from local players, but actually from global players that we provide services in Australia and New Zealand. So this is with respect to one thing. And with regards to
Ron, just very, very quickly to that point, how long do you hold on to that data for? And also, one of the big bywords here in Australia, and I think in New Zealand too, is sovereignty, and a sovereign solution, sovereign data. Just to speak to that just a little bit before going to.
We are servants of our masters, and our masters is our customers, or the corporations. So we do whatever they tell us to do. Inside our contracts, we have different data retention policies, and we follow. So some of our customers want zero retention, some wants a week, and some wants longer. So we follow by what we are contractual to do with them, and we put the right protections and the right policies in order to make that happen. So as I said, we are servers. It's a state of mind, and that's how we provide service to our customers. It relates to our instinct. Actually, while we're talking, I was gonna upload, if I'm allowed to share I don't know if I'm allowed to share my screen, but I want to show you the different attacks we've been seeing coming from across the world. And if I, one second, share screen. Thank you very much. So here you see basically the heat map of attacks of synthetic fraud we're seeing coming on a global level. Okay, so this is, you see the different vectors of attack, 500,000, the different conflicts we've seen in the last world. And if we look at Australia, and you see Australia is not a small dot, with 35,000 attacks coming from Australia, you can see.
Sorry, when you say coming from Australia, that means in Australia or originating from Australia? Originating from Australia with Australian citizens, okay? And even so Alex, impacting on Australians, not they're not. Well, it might. I haven't. Well, it could be. I need to look at the IP where it's coming from, and the IP and the geolocation. It's not that granular, okay? But even you see, we don't have a lot. We have a few even coming from New Zealand, as you see, Alex. You're not that clean, but you see. Well, it's when we started opening the Australian market for synthetic fraud, it's being you see from the last couple of months, even in September. So we see a lot of conflicts in the last. Say this 380 these confirmed this is the average attack per identity. Sorry, these are the unique attacks. But if we're talking from let's say if we're going to minimize it just from let's go just for beginning of this year, I would say we have about, it hasn't really changed. We have a massive attack coming on Australia in the last couple of months. So, and you see this is, by the way, this is live data. So which would be the Optus one? Could be. We don't know really what's the use case because we haven't really drilled down, but you can see where it's coming from. So lots of conflicts coming in the last, yeah, definitely very interesting. So everything is anonymous. So only our customers basically can decipher if it's their customers or not. We don't really know where it's coming from because for us, we're neutral. But what we're providing is, listen, this specific person has been compromised, and we can go much deeper. This is just from this is anonymized stuff. We have another dashboard we show to our customers on what use cases, but you can definitely see where things are coming across the globe in that respect, and specific in Australia, and for what use cases. So you can start defining as block, you can start, as you say in rugby, tackling them and start to preventing them from using these identities in other places, or basically even, or if the regulators would have gone, we can give them they can work with the customers. Listen, these identities have been breached, therefore we should give them additional protection. So this gives a bit of the scope and the magnitude we see, and as you said, because we deal with so many global customers, it's not just related to the Australian or New Zealand market. This is viral, so it can go. We can see these identities being breached in the US. We can see these identities being breached in. I mean, you see where you see our global coverage. So in that respect, it's super interesting. And it looks like Australia is relatively high, if that circle is proportional. Yes, you're correct. Even, it's, you're only 25 million people? 25 million people, exactly, yeah. Yeah, and look at the US, and US is, so proportional for the last couple of months, Australia is relatively high. So definitely, I would say there is definitely something coming out, and if we connect the dots, I would say it wouldn't be too crazy to say that Optus was a bit of an accelerator for this. Except the Optus has really only been in the last month. So could have been a few more. Let's not just more recent than this data. Yes. So there's probably a lot of stuff going on that we're not even aware. Yeah, I would say so, yes. Interesting.
That's really interesting.
So that gives you a bit of perspective what we see. I mean, like, don't forget, we are blind. We don't know exactly who it is, but our customers, they have the key to read unlock the data and then understand where it's coming from. For us, it's just plain water. If we're trying to use simple words, they can color it. They have the color of the water.
Thank you very much, Josh, and the New Zealand Israel Innovation Hub for putting together. This has been a very fascinating discussion.
And Jacob Oberman at Collab 82. I have to say, thanks very much, Jacob, for helping us out.
Thank you to Collab 82 as well. Absolutely.
And thanks, Jeremy, for hosting.
Wish everyone a Yom Tov in Israel, a good evening in New Zealand, and maybe we have a little bit of sun still and a little bit of the afternoon in Australia still. Not much. And I'm going to go back inside and find out where my daughter is. An hour and a half after this webinar, she's apparently still in the waiting room. So it shows that some things don't move very fast.
We wish you all the
Thank you very
best.
much. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
Jeremy.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.